A Mochi moment from Sadie, who writes, I'm not crying, you're crying. This is what I said during my first appointment with my physician at Mochi, because I didn't have to convince him I needed a GLP-1. He understood, and I felt supported, not judged. I came for the weight loss and stayed for the empathy. Thanks, Sadie. I'm Myra Ahmed, founder of Mochi Health. To find your Mochi moment, visit joinmochi.com.
Sadie is a Mochi member compensated for her story.
Oh yeah, look at my life. Hey now, hey now, yeah.
Hey now.
Oh yeah, look at my life out here on the road. Oh yeah, look at my life. Hey now, yeah. Oh yeah, look at my life out here on the road.
Hey now, hello, hi friends. Welcome to Scott Fox After 9. I love that song, by the way. Pat James and The Whole Truth. Hey now. You can find that wherever you get music. Welcome to this episode of the pod. Today, I'm going to be talking about an elusive character. His name is Prime Minister Mark Carney. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the PM on this episode a lot today, actually. You see, Mark Carney last week had gone AWOL, even the week before. He took a little staycation in the Ottawa area, which is fine, I guess. I mean, I'd rather our members of parliament be sitting in the middle of numerous different crises that are happening right now. That's what I would prefer. I think the vast majority of the country would prefer that, but that's not what Mark decided to do. He sent all the members of parliament home for the summer, and then they can all take vacations and stuff. So we didn't hear much from the guy, and I thought that that was a little peculiar. We've got a lot going on. Where's our PM? Well, he finally came out, but he came out on a Friday. And if you're a longtime listener of After 9, you already know I have a theory that when politicians need to announce big news, but they don't really want anyone to hear it, they do it on a Friday because it gets buried. People are excited about the weekend and there's other stuff going on, and we don't really talk too much about that. There's another reason, too. Most of the mainstream media that would normally analyze these things and cover up for any faux pas, they don't work on the weekends. You get the B team on the weekends. So that's why politicians make big announcements on Friday. So as I was recording a listener DM episode of Scott Fox After 9 on Friday, the Prime Minister came out. Well, that's frustrating. Mark, that is a weak move, my friend. You got to do these things in prime time. Well, there's a lot to discuss here. I'm going to do two different Prime Minister Carney media avails here in this episode because some very consequential stuff got announced by our Prime Minister. First off, on Friday, he announced the elbows are down, everyone. Please follow along. The elbows are now down. We have capitulated to the United States of America. Prime Minister Carney has bowed down before President Donald Trump. He has said we are dropping our retaliatory tariffs. You know, the ones that Doug Ford said not only should we keep, we should double down on them. Hit them as hard as they hit us. Prime Minister Carney is doing the exact opposite of that advice. Don't take it from me, though. Let's hear the Prime Minister in his own words so that you can hear the context. Let's hear him explain to you exactly what Canada's new position on dealing with the Americans is.
The breadth and the depth of the changes in U.S. trade policy have become more fully apparent. Specifically, under the new U.S. approach, countries must now buy access to the world's largest economy through a combination of tariffs, investments, unilateral trade liberalization, and policy changes in their home markets. Now, as in previous trade disputes, Canada has implemented a series of retaliatory tariffs. Their objectives have been to protect Canadian workers and businesses and to incentivize a negotiated settlement with the United States. Few other countries followed suit. In a positive and very important development earlier this month, just a few weeks ago, the United States reaffirmed a core commitment to our free trade agreement, CUSMA, by reinforcing that those Canadian exports to the United States that are compliant with that agreement, that are compliant with CUSMA, will not be subject to U.S. IEEPA tariffs. Now, there's a lot of acronyms in that paragraph, so let me try to summarize what that actually means. As a result of that decision by the United States, the actual U.S. tariff rate on Canadian goods is 5.6%, Compare that to the 16% global average. That remains the lowest amongst all of the United States trading partners. And more than 85% of Canada-US trade is now tariff-free. So let's be absolutely clear. Canada currently has the best trade deal with the United States. And while it's different from what we had before, it is still better than that of any other country. So as we work to address outstanding trade issues with the United States, it's important, it's vital. We do everything we can to preserve this unique advantage for Canadian workers, Canadian businesses. And doing so will require both building on a soon-to-be revised CUSMA, our free trade agreement with the U.S. and Mexico, as well as developing a new form of trade and security partnership with the United States. In this context, and consistent with Canada's commitment to CUSMA, I'm announcing today that the Canadian government will now match the United States by removing all of Canada's tariffs on U.S. goods specifically covered under CUSMA.
I'm going to stop him right there because I don't want you to fall asleep. If you're behind the wheel or something like that, please try and maintain your composure. That was not exactly the most exciting announcement we've ever heard from a prime minister here in Canada. But that was the prime minister phrasing it in an interesting way. You know, he said a lot of things in there that I was dying to stop and jump in. I was dying to, but I wanted you to hear the prime minister in context, in his own words, explain to you where he's coming from. He said, we have the best trade deal in the world with the Americans. He also, and go ahead and fact check me on this, rewind if you want to, he said, we have an advantage and Canadian workers are protected. I don't know if many people feel like we're getting advantaged here at this point. I really don't know that many people feel like jobs are secure because of the current deal we have with the Americans, but that's what the prime minister said. He said this current deal is an advantage. That's some serious spin. He also said we're matching the Americans. What he should have said, or what he could have said another way that would have made it much more direct, although not a nice soundbite, is Canada is dropping its retaliatory tariffs against the Americans. Full stop. That's what it is. September 1st, we are no longer retaliating. You know, the Americans have made a big deal out of the fact that Canada and China were the only two countries to retaliate. Mark started in his speech to go down that road, but he stopped short. He didn't actually acknowledge that. He said not many joined us in retaliating against the Americans. In other words, we were left out in the wind. You know, Mark is trying to make us all European, right? He wants us to be European, the most European of the non-European countries. Well, none of Europe had our back here. None of them. And I don't know why we would try and become more European when the Europeans did not stand up for us, and nor did they advocate for us to be at the White House when Zelensky and the European leaders were there last week to try and find peace in Ukraine. By the way, don't think I'm not going to talk about Ukraine in this one. That is coming up later on in this episode. You've heard the Prime Minister make the announcement. Now let's find out what the President of the United States thinks about Prime Minister Carney announcing again, elbows are firmly down. Down. Forget the elbows up. It's over. Carney himself just ended it. We're not fighting back anymore. Here is what the President of the United States had to say.
A very good call with Prime Minister Carney of Canada yesterday morning.
Yes.
Actually, Canada is taking away some retaliatory tariffs.
He's removing his tariffs, yeah.
Exactly.
He's removing his retaliatory tariffs, which I thought was nice. And we're going to have another call soon.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a very good call.
You're getting closer towards an agreement on trade?
I like him. You know, look, I'm fighting for the United States. Canada and Mexico take a lot of our business over the years, over 25, 30 years. Especially during the Biden years. They took a lot of our business, and it's basically all coming back into the United States now. We're hot as a pistol, and it's coming back in. Because of tariffs and the incentives we give, it's coming back. And it's impossible, I think, for another country to stop it. And we are working on something. We want to be very good to Canada. I like Carney a lot. I think he's a good person. And we had a very good talk yesterday, so I think it'll be good.
Mr. President.
right. So the president likes it. The president again comments on how much he likes Mark Carney, and a little history lesson here. The president said during the election campaign, he liked Carney. He wanted Carney to win. And ever since then, it's been proven time and time again why. Because he gets what he wants out of Mark Carney. Mark Carney isn't fighting back. Mark Carney is doing whatever he's told to do. The president said that in those words last week. Canada does what they're told to do. Mark Carney dropped the retaliatory tariffs. That's after he dropped the digital services tax. That's after a whole bunch of other capitulation moments. What the hell is going on here? This is not what Mark Carney said he was going to do if we voted for him. He said he was going to make us the strongest economy in the G7. We're going to fight back against the Americans. We're going to be self-sufficient. We're going to be, you name it. So many promises. This seems like another one that got broken. It's the way it seems to me. But let's hear now what the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, had to say in response to the Prime Minister's announcement on Friday.
His signature promise in the last election was that he was going to put elbows up, negotiate a win, and match American tariffs. Let's go through the list. He's not thrown one elbow since he took office, except at our own workers. He did not meet his promise of a July 21st deal with the Americans. Again, his promise, not mine. He did not, he's backed down while claiming that he would stand up. And he's gotten absolutely nothing in return. In fact, American tariffs are twice as high on Canada today as they were when Prime Minister Carney took office, promising to deploy his negotiating skills to get us a win. He promised he would have elbows up. He promised he could, quote, handle Trump, and that he would, quote, negotiate a win. Those are his promises, and he needs to be judged by his word. And this was not any promise, just any old promise on page 73 of his platform. It was the promise on which he ran his entire election campaign. And now he's abandoning it. So either he admits that he was wrong all along, or that he knowingly spread falsehoods to get elected. He needs to explain which of those two things it is. But it adds to a long list of broken promises. Remember, he was going to build more and at faster speeds than ever before? Well, you know, he's getting breathless media coverage because he's setting up a new office that will one day approve projects that may one day get built. 160 days in, and he's bragging that he's close to setting up a construction office of bureaucrats who don't swing hammers or operate heavy machinery, but sit in front of computer screens in Ottawa department buildings. And not one pipeline has been identified, not one LNG plant, not one nuclear plant, not one hydroelectricity dam, not one major project has been identified, let alone approved in the 160 days since he took office. And all of the anti-resource laws that will make them impossible to complete remain in place. On housing, he said he'd double home building. His housing agency says home building will drop by 13% over the next 2 years. And the housing crisis has tripled in its different directions. Under Trudeau, it was just that they were too expensive for anyone to buy. Now, it's too costly for builders to build, buyers to buy, or sellers to sell. An almost impossible triumvirate of failure in housing hell that only a Liberal Prime Minister could have accomplished. He said he would invest more and spend less. Well, look at the numbers. Spending is up 8% under Mr. Carney, and it looks like the deficit will be twice the one that Trudeau left behind. Though we don't know because Mr. Carney, the genius banker, still hasn't introduced a budget. And then there is the investment side, down $60 billion in what the Financial Times says the single biggest net outflow of investment in any 5-month period. That is Mr. Carney's track record on investment. He is spending more and investing less.
I mean, what the hell? Holy cow. I was getting exhausted listening to that. That was Pierre Poilievre outlining all of the different things that Mark Carney said he was going to do and didn't do. Whew. Catch your breath. Isn't that wild? Isn't that wild? And there's no consequence for that here in Canada either. You know, you can literally promise anything you want. You could go to the voters and say, I will give every single one of you $1 million, a free home, and a Porsche. Just vote for me. And then even if they don't come through on any of those things, there's no consequence. They get to stay in power. Why is that? Where did the integrity in politics go? Well, maybe there was never any. Maybe there wasn't. We've had some real great, principled prime ministers that even if you disagreed with them, you knew that they were running for the right reasons. They cared deeply about our country, and they had a vision. Even if it was one we disagreed with, they had a vision. Pierre Poilievre just outlined right there all the different reasons that Canadian voters got duped by Mark Carney. So far, there's been absolutely nothing. Now, in fairness, though, it isn't everybody that's all down on Mark Carney, because Doug Ford, even though he told Mark do the exact opposite of what Mark ended up doing, still says Mark Carney's doing a great job. Still says he's working his back off and he's doing great. Do you still feel that way, Doug Ford? Do you want to come out in front of the cameras today and congratulate the Prime Minister on the wonderful job he's doing? Where's Doug Ford? I want a news conference from that man. I want somebody to ask him, hey, Doug, given that Carney basically just slapped you in the face, how do you feel now? I'd love to hear an answer to that. I really would. Now, let's get to more of this, though. This isn't just me pontificating here. Let's hear more from the leaders, because it's important that you make up your own mind. I offer commentary, but that's me, and I do have a bias. I'm coming at this from the lens of a longtime conservative voter who is compassionate on social issues, but certainly fiscally responsible. I don't know if Mark Carney is either of those things, to be perfectly honest with you, but he did get asked an obvious question on Friday when he announced we're dropping our retaliatory tariffs against America. Is this an elbows down moment? This is a reporter from the Canadian Press.
Mr. Carney, thank you for taking our questions. Your critics are going to say that this is an elbows down approach, that you're backing down to Trump. What are you gaining by dropping these tariffs?
So the first thing to say is, let's be clear. We have the best deal of anyone in the world right now. We have the lowest tariff rate on average, a little over 5.5% versus that 16% average for the world, and in many cases much higher. We have that confirmed in an executive order of the president a few weeks ago. It's important that we preserve that. It's important that we preserve that while we focus on two things: the strategic sectors, steel, aluminum, autos, lumber, and we focus on the upcoming review and likely changes to CUSMA. So we are matching something the Americans have done here first. Okay? And it's very significant. It's unique. We get the benefit. The second thing is, and I'll take your analogy. And I have played some hockey over the years. And there is a time in a game, in a big game, and this is a big game, when you go hard in the corners, your elbows up. The time in a game where you drop the gloves in the first period and you send a message. And we've done that pretty uniquely in the world. We happen to have the best deal with the Americans right now. I'd note. But there's also a time in a game where you want the puck, you want a stick handle, you want to pass, you want to put the puck in the net. And we're moving later into the game, and we're at that time in the game. And that's where the engagement is.
We're just playing a big hockey game here, everybody. Yeah, we got all tough and blustery at the beginning, and we threw some elbows, apparently, but now it's time to stick handle. Now it's time to focus on other things. Now we're going to start playing Canada's game. Are we? Because what I just heard from the Prime Minister there, what I just heard was him acknowledging that our initial strategy of retaliation and all this bluster, we'll never be the 51st state, all that nonsense that got Carney elected, it never mattered. It was always the wrong strategy. Trump said from the beginning, he doesn't like this move that Canada's pulling here. And we doubled down on it until Carney got elected, until Doug Ford got reelected. We doubled down on that stuff. Now here's the Prime Minister admitting and acknowledging that that's over. We're elbows down. Forget it. It's over. The only thing that's going to be is an ongoing joke for many years to come on social media. That's all elbows up is now. It is done. What about the other irritants between us and America? You know, Mark Carney can control the federal response, but he can't necessarily control the provincial response. Given that we're playing nice with the Americans now, and by the way, before I get to this part, I firmly believe a deal is coming with America. I've said it all along. We will get a deal. We delayed it. We prolonged it with our elbows up approach there, which now the Prime Minister has admitted was the wrong strategy. We prolonged that. But I have every reason to believe a deal is coming soon. And you bet your butt, Carney's going to come down like Moses from the mountain. Hear ye, look at the deal I got done with the Americans. There's going to be a lot of questions about that. No doubt. No doubt at all. But I think before we get to a deal with the Americans, there's a couple other things that need to be done. Why is U.S. liquor still banned in Canadian liquor stores? Why is that? It is August the 25th, 2025, and you still can't buy California wine at the Ontario liquor stores. You still can't get Jack Daniels. You still can't get bourbon because it comes from America. Why is that? And when are we going to stop that nonsense? I said from the beginning that was a mistake. The U.S. never banned our alcohol. You know, these retaliatory tariffs that we put up, we put them on stuff that the U.S. was not tariffing us on. We escalated this. Carney admits we escalated it, and it was unnecessary. If now we get to a deal with the Americans, it just proves what I just said, that the elbows up approach was wrong from the beginning. It was right to get Carney elected and to get Doug Ford reelected, but it wasn't right for getting a deal done with the Americans. Let's see how long it takes between when we drop our retaliatory tariffs and when a deal gets done. Let's see how long that takes. A week? 10 days? 2 weeks? A month? Well, working backwards, we could have had a deal back in April. Maybe even earlier, if that's all it took. But no, we threw up our retaliation because it was for politics. It was for optics. It was because Mark Carney needed you so scared of Donald Trump that you were willing to do anything to get behind him and his crazy strategy, even though he's now acknowledging that wasn't the right strategy. It wasn't. Let me hear now a little bit more from Pierre Poilievre, who spoke outside the House of Commons on Friday.
And we also continue to extend our hand to Prime Minister Carney to work together to get a good deal with the Americans. I promised that, and I offered that to him multiple times directly. My Shadow Minister of Canada U.S. Affairs has said the same thing to her counterpart. So far, no response. The Liberals seem to want to play partisan games and score political points rather than working with all parties to get a good deal for Canada. So my message to Mr. Carney, put partisanship aside and work with all parties to get an actual deal with the Americans that stands up for Canada's interest. We have to judge Mr. Carney by his performance, and not by the standards I set, by the ones that he set out for himself. So let's do that today. First, I was happy to hear that he got the President on the phone. I know that Mr. Carney has been trying to do that now for about a month, and today the President accepted his call. And the Prime Minister took the opportunity to make a series of very generous concessions to President Trump. And I was expecting that when the call was reported that we'd find that President Trump had given us something in return, that Mr. Carney, being the negotiator he promised he would be, that he would get something after giving something. But not so. Today we learn that it has been yet another capitulation and climb down by Mark Carney. His elbows have mysteriously gone missing. And this call follows on other concessions. He promised during the campaign he would have dollar-for-dollar retaliation. He pulled that back. He made concessions on the military while getting nothing in return. He pulled back on his digital services tax, a terrible tax, but you'd think he'd get something in return for it. Nothing. And today, he removed even almost all of the tariffs on the United States and got none lifted from Canada. This continues with the weakness that he's shown on the world stage, continuing ahead with a $1 billion loan to the dictatorship in Beijing to build ships for Canada, creating jobs for foreign workers in steel and shipbuilding, while that same regime hits our farmers and fish harvesters with increasingly high and unfair tariffs. Mr. Carney's capitulations would be laughable if they weren't so tragic.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think everybody gets the point, right? Everybody understands what's going on here. By the way, I totally even forgot about China. What the hell's going on there? They're hitting us with a 100% tariff. Why is nothing being done about that? You know, I think Pierre summed it up nicely there. It would almost be funny if it wasn't so sad what's happening. I think back to during the election, there was an article that was published, and it didn't last very long in the mainstream news cycle because the mainstream media has a narrative, right? And they don't want us to see everything. Well, something did cut through briefly before it got buried. There was a story about Mark Carney's wife and where she works. And her boss published an op-ed that predicted shortly after the election, which Mark Carney would win, Canada would quietly fold to the Americans. And it's funny because people laugh that off. Yeah, right. We're not going to fold to the Americans. Look what we just did. Carney's wife's boss seems to have been spot on. How did he know that, though? How did he know that that's what Carney was going to do? Get elected, go through that sleepy summer news cycle, and hope that nobody notices, but slowly but surely, he is just capitulating to the Americans. What have we still got on the table here? What are we negotiating over now? I think the Prime Minister owes us an update because this is not what people voted for at all. In fact, it's the exact opposite of what people voted for. But I want to go over to Ukraine now because the Prime Minister mysteriously showed up in Ukraine on the weekend, and it was their Independence Day. This is patterned behavior, by the way, out of the Prime Minister's office. You'll likely have noticed that every time things aren't looking good here at home, the Prime Minister jets off to Ukraine. Now, why is that? There's still something about Ukraine, guys. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about Ukraine that the world elites and left-leaning governments are very fascinated by. Something about it, because they don't just want Russia out of Ukraine. They want their troops in Ukraine. To protect what exactly? To guard what? To do what? You know, they say it's to promote peace and prosperity and a rebuild in the region. I don't know. Something oddly fascinating about Ukraine, that country in particular. I'm interested in that. And I'm not quite sure why. I don't have anything to report here, but there's something about Ukraine. The Prime Minister announced he's giving them another $2 billion. Another $2 billion. The audio on this isn't great. The Prime Minister has to travel in and out of Kyiv very quietly. Apparently, it's a war zone, although they're standing outside in front of the Capitol, surrounded by lots of people who are sitting in cafes and having coffee and walking their dogs and stuff. It certainly doesn't look like a country at war, not in the Capitol anyway. But the Prime Minister had to go in there quietly. We don't have a ton of Canadian media that had access to this, so you're going to hear a bit of a speech here. I think it's about a minute and a half long. Again, the audio isn't great, but it's the best that we've got to work with. Listen to the Prime Minister's announcement yesterday in Kyiv.
Mr. President, dear friends, my message today is simple. Canada will always stand in solidarity with Ukraine. Canada, under my predecessor, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, has become the largest per capita contributor of financial aid to Ukraine. Today, I come here with the honor of leading Canada's new government, and I commit that Canada will remain by Ukraine's side in your fight for independence, sovereignty, and freedom. That's why when you, Mr. President, joined the G7 summit this past June in Canada, we joined others in enacting new sanctions against thousands of Russian entities and hundreds of Russia's foreign enablers of this brutal war. While we weaken Russia, we work to strengthen Ukraine. At that same G7, Canada pledged an additional $2 billion in military assistance. And today I'm proud to announce that over $1 billion of that support will be used to strengthen your arsenal with urgently needed drones, ammunition, armored vehicles, material that will arrive next month. We'll also fund the joint production of defense material, including advanced drones, from Canadian suppliers. And we'll provide tens of millions of new funding to support emergency medical and shelter assistance.
$2 billion. What? We've already given Ukraine over $20 billion. You just heard Carney say Canada is the largest per capita donor to Ukraine. Then he handed over millions and millions and millions more. Why are we doing this? Hey, listen, we can debate whether or not Ukraine is a worthy cause. And I know there's some people who feel not 1 cent more should go to Ukraine. There's some who feel we shouldn't have given them anything in the first place. And there's some who feel we just can't give them enough. Whatever they need, we got to give it to them. However you feel about that is totally up to you. But what I'm going to suggest here is we need that money here in Canada. What would another $2 billion do for the Canadian people? What more could we do? Could we finally fund the $10 a day childcare program? Could we finally get people who need life-saving drugs, their drugs? Could we finally invest some money into our healthcare system so people aren't waiting and dying in emergency rooms and waiting for specialist appointments and specific diagnostic imaging scans? Could that money be used for any improvement here in Canada? Could it get some of the tens of thousands of people that are homeless right now off the street? Could it shorten some of the lines at food banks? Anything? Could we do anything with that money here, or are all the problems solved? We don't have a money crisis here in Canada. Go ahead and give it away. I've used this analogy before, and I think it's relevant here, so I'm going to say it again. When you get on an airplane, you are required to watch the safety instructions. And what's the first thing they tell you to do? In the event of a water landing, you put your own life jacket on before you secure the life jacket of your kids or the people you're traveling with. You put your own on first, then you help others. Now, why is that? Because unless you're safe yourself, unless you shore up yourself, you can't help other people, and you may all go down. That's an important safety instruction, and frankly, I think that our government doesn't understand that message. I really don't think they get it. It is essential that we take care of our problems at home before we start handing out to charity. People knock on my door all the time, raising money for sick kids and all kinds of different causes that I agree with and like and would love to support. But until my bills get paid, until my household is safe and secure, I can't spend that money. I can't put that extra money out there. It would be irresponsible to my family if I took our money and just gave it away to different causes, because we need that money at home. It's the exact same thing in Canada. We're giving away all this money to Ukraine. And again, it doesn't matter if you feel like they're a worthy cause. We cannot afford that. What did Donald Trump do with Ukraine? He knows the American taxpayers have had enough. No more money to Ukraine. Well, the left was going to shame the living hell out of Donald Trump if he cut off all funding for Ukraine. So what did he do? He got himself a better deal. He told Europe, this is your problem. Tell you what, you want to fund Ukraine? No problem. We're out, but we will give you a deal on arms that you want to send to Ukraine when you buy them from America. In other words, if you want to go ahead and give fighter jets to Ukraine, no problem. We'll sell them to you at a discount, but we're not stroking a check again. And where does that money go when we send it to Ukraine? If we just send them a check for $1 billion, how do we know what it's being spent on? How do we know for sure that that money is being managed responsibly? Is there a balance sheet somewhere that we could all look at to say, okay, out of the last $1 million that we sent to Ukraine, $100,000 was used on ammunition, and $200,000 was used on the military, and another $200,000 was used on medicine and supplies for the front lines. Could we get some receipts, please? Because I want to know that our money is being spent responsibly, and frankly, I do not believe that it is. I don't believe it is. Let me play a little bit more of Prime Minister Carney speaking in Kyiv yesterday.
Hi, Briar Stewart from CBC. Prime Minister, given that Russia has rejected the idea of a NATO-backed security guarantee and European forces on the ground, what actually do you think the chances are of a ceasefire? And if there is one, I mean, you mentioned you don't exclude the presence of Canadian troops on the ground. Are you referring to that in a peacekeeping capacity or training? If you could answer that also in French. And President Zelensky, you talked about the importance of having a presence of Canadian troops. I'm wondering what more you can say about that.
Well, I'd like to thank Briar Stewart and the CBC for keeping it brief. Right. Respect those rules in those press pools. How did the CBC get there? Like, I wasn't invited. Was the rest of the press pool invited? Why was CBC there? I know why. And I think you do too. CBC is the preferred media outlet of the Liberal government. Let's get to the answer from Prime Minister Carney.
Well, the first is we need a cessation of hostilities. We need a ceasefire. We can call it a ceasefire, a truce, an armistice. That's necessary to stop the killing. But the conditions around that, there will be military force in Ukraine, Ukrainian military force. There'll be no exclusion of pathways for Ukraine to the European Union or to NATO for that matter, pathways towards. And there will be security guarantees. There will be security guarantees in any durable ceasefire. That's the lesson of Minsk. That's the lesson of 2014. That's the lesson of history, is that we need not to trust and verify, but deter and fortify. And the fortification, the deterrence, is anchored in those security guarantees. Again, as I said, starting with the Ukrainian army and reinforcing that, but then being buttressed by the coalition of the willing. And again, I welcome, without specifying, welcome the openness of President Trump to some form of U.S. participation in that. Now, all of this in real time, as you ask your question, is under discussion about the specificities and the modalities. But it's not the choice of Russia how the future sovereignty, independence, liberty of Ukraine is guaranteed. It's the choice of Ukraine and the decisions of the partners.
I don't know what the hell he said. I have no idea. What? I don't think he answered that question, but I might be wrong. Like, I honestly don't understand what it was he was saying. That was a word salad that traditionally Justin Trudeau would have made, and that would have been one of his best. I didn't understand a word he said there. I just don't get it. Ukraine's got to have a say in their future. Sure, we all agree with that. I think we all agree with that. Don't we all agree with that? I think we do, right? I don't get where he's going with that. But since it did come up, let's before this just becomes a rumor or a whisper or a mistruth or something like that, the question was about boots on the ground in Ukraine. Is Mark Carney seriously going to take the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces, put weapons in their hands, and send them over to Ukraine to start shooting at Russian people? Would he actually do that? That's what boots on the ground means. It means Canadian combat soldiers in Ukraine. Would he actually do that? And do we even have a military capable of that right now? This is kind of a wordy answer as well, but here is the Prime Minister talking about that.
And my question is, what kind of security guarantees could Canada provide Ukraine with? Do you consider to deploy troops on the ground, probably? Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the question. With respect to security guarantees, I think we all recognize that the core of the security guarantee, the front line, the foundation, is robust Ukrainian armed forces. And it's crucial in those regards that the military equipment today and tomorrow is here, the industrial capacity is here. It's crucial that the training capacity is there as well. And I'd note that since Russia's illegal seizure of Crimea, Operation Unifier, which Canada put in place, has trained over 45,000 Ukrainian troops. This will become even more important going forward. That's the front line, but that's should be buttressed by the coalition of the willing, potentially the United States, in matters of intelligence and other support. We are working through with our allies in coalition of the willing and with Ukraine the modalities of those security guarantees on the land, in the air, and the sea, and I would not exclude the presence of troops. Okay.
I would not exclude the presence of troops. Well, get ready. If you're a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, and this goes the way Macron and Starmer and Carney and all these left-leaning leaders want it to go, they will have troops on the ground in Ukraine. If you're a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, get ready. You're probably going to Ukraine. You're probably going to be given a gun and told, shoot at anything Russian that is a threat to you. Shoot it. I don't want to send Canadian troops into harm's way in Ukraine. I don't. We've done enough, haven't we? Is there more that we could do? Maybe in a training capacity, something like that? Okay, maybe we can talk about that. I do not want Canadian troops in a combat role in Ukraine. Full stop. End of sentence. No. Absolutely not, Mark. You are not sending Canadian troops who are underfunded, overworked, under-equipped, and the list goes on, undermanned. We are not sending them into harm's way for this war in Ukraine. We're not doing it. No. It will be a bloodbath, and I do not want my fellow Canadians who wear the maple leaf on their arm going into harm's way over this. No way. You figure out a way to do it the way Trump did it. You want more out of Canada? We've got stuff. We've got those LAV vehicles, the light armored vehicles. We can sell you those. Apparently, we're pretty good at making drones. We'll sell you those, but we're selling them to you. We're not giving them to you. I'm led to believe that at least some of the money we gave to Ukraine was a loan. When are we getting paid back for that? When can we expect a repayment here? How much more money does he intend to sink into Ukraine? Because next, you know what's coming. Well, we're going to have to spend $500 billion to help rebuild Ukraine. Why are we doing that? It had nothing to do with us. We've already done our part. Leave it alone, Mark. All in all, not a great 72 hours for Mark Carney. And it's already being reflected in polling that was done before this disastrous 72 hours for Mark Carney. I'm going to read you a story here. It's about Abascus Data's latest poll. It was conducted last week. So before Carney announced that the elbows are down and we might put Canadian troops on the ground in Ukraine, it found that if an election were held today, 41% of decided voters would cast a ballot for the Conservative Party of Canada. That's up. Liberal support has slipped 4 points down to 39% since the question was asked at the beginning of August. Now, it's worth noting here, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's victory in that Alberta by-election is not factored into this survey. It happened toward the end of the polling period. How much do you think the polls are going to change now? Because I'm hearing from no shortage of people that have had enough. I am so proud of some of my listeners because obviously I'm a Pierre Poilievre supporter. I've declared that from the beginning. That is my bias. You know, the CBC, if they had any integrity, and most of the mainstream media actually, if they had any journalistic integrity, would declare their bias. CBC at the beginning of every newscast should come on and say a few things. Number one, we are liberals and we want liberals to remain in power. They should say that straight up. Because right now they're going with that narrative. They're really positioning themselves that way, but they never actually declare it. They want you to think they're not biased, that they're down the middle and fair, but they're not. They support the Liberal government, the CBC, because if the Conservatives get elected, they know they're getting defunded. The CBC never declares their bias. You know what else the CBC should do? And I mean all the mainstream media outlets, really. Every time they bring on some so-called expert to offer an opinion, it should say right on the screen, you are not watching news. These are not facts. This is the opinion of the commentator. But when they put it on the news, it makes it seem like, oh, this is news. I should pay attention to this. It's not news. It's just somebody's opinion. If you want an opinion on just about any topic, you can get one. Go ride the bus and ask somebody, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? You'll get opinions. Just because somebody has university-style initials behind their name does not make them qualified or an expert on any particular topic in general. Generally speaking, anyway. The CBC, the mainstream media are extremely misleading, and that has gaslit a lot of Canadians. In fact, during the election, it was gaslighting on steroids. It was. But now, I'm starting to hear from people. I think one of the hardest things in the world to do is admit you were wrong. Admit you've made a mistake. But voluntarily, people are messaging me and admitting they made a mistake. Let me read you a DM that just came in a few minutes before I started recording this pod. Hey, Scott, I was just listening to your Friday podcast. I was talking to my parents over the weekend. My parents, unfortunately, voted for Carney. This weekend, they admitted they regretted voting for Carney. Okay, I mean, that's just one. Just one. But that's just the first one. It's going to be coming. Those polls already switching back to the Conservatives, that says a lot. And that doesn't even take into account this disastrous 72 hours that Mark Carney has had. It's going to be a crazy fall, everybody. It is going to be a wild fall. The level of unpopularity that Justin Trudeau was at back in, say, January, I'm thinking Mark Carney might challenge for that low. He very well might challenge for that low because what's happening right now is not popular, and people know. They're not stupid. They know. That is not what Carney promised, and that is not what people voted for. It's not. Before I end this episode of Scott Fox After 9, I want to play one more thing, and it's a topic that's come up numerous times over the last couple of weeks. It's regarding castle laws. Stand your ground. I maintain that if somebody breaks into your home, if somebody is threatening you, your property, or your family, you should have the legal protection to use any force necessary that you think is necessary to defend yourself, your property, and your family. Well, we don't have those legal protections right now. We don't. And a lot of people, I think it's probably over 80% if we did a poll, believe we need, enshrined right in the Constitution, the ability to defend ourselves using any force that we see necessary. We haven't heard Mark Carney talk about that. We haven't heard the Justice Minister talk about that. We haven't really heard the Liberals talk about that at all. The leader of the opposition was asked about that topic on Friday. Listen to Pierre Poilievre talking about stand your ground or castle laws.
The law needs to be clear that if someone comes into your house uninvited to steal your property or harm your family, you need to be able to do whatever is necessary to stop them. And my message to the criminal thugs who are invading the homes of Canadians in unprecedented numbers because of Liberal laws is that you should be in serious danger if you go into someone's house illegally and try to harm them. If you don't want to be harmed, then don't invade someone's house and don't threaten their security. The law needs to be very clear that people have the right to defend their homes and their families against lawbreakers.
And I don't think many people disagree with that. Like I said, if we did a poll and it was an honest, fair poll, not one of the polls that's meant to skew public opinion. A lot of polls are out there like that. People are very follow the herd in a lot of cases. That's the mentality of a lot. They look at the polls and they see, oh, wow, the NDP is doing great. I'm interested in them. I'm on the NDP. I'm going to vote for them too. It's remarkable how often that happens. And that's part of the reason that polling still gets done, particularly during the election. There was a whole narrative around polling when we had our federal election in the spring. Ooh, look at this comeback happening from the Liberals. Was there actually a comeback happening, or did the polls come out with those numbers to try and create the narrative that people were starting to switch to Carney, and then that herd mentality piled on, and that's what eventually led to an election victory? I don't like polls. I think it should be illegal to publish polls during an election period. After the 30-day period before the election begins, no polling should be released. None. It's only intended to sway voters. And I don't think it's all that accurate anyway, unless 1,700 people apparently are representative of the opinions of over 40 million. Doesn't make any sense. But I'd be willing to bet that if we did an honest and fair poll, 80% of the country would support having castle laws or stand your ground laws. Is that something the government is going to take up in the fall? I don't think so, but we'll wait and see. We'll go into it with an ounce of optimism. Friends, there's going to be at least 4 episodes this week. I think I'm going to take an extended long weekend, like I'm hoping many of you do as well. Labor Day is a holiday for labor, for all of us, the working class who go to work every single day to earn a living and support our family and to feed government overspending. That's where all of our taxes go. Half of our income goes to that. Well, Labor Day is a day where we are entitled to a day off, and I hope that people get that day and then some. Try and make it a relaxing few days before we go back to school and all the other things that begin next week. I'll catch you right back here in less than 24 hours with another episode of Scott Fox After 9. Have a great day, friends.
Oh, yeah, look at my life. Hey now, yeah. Oh, yeah, look at my life out here on the road. Oh, yeah, look at my life. Hey now, yeah. Oh, yeah, look at my life out here on the road.
Beautiful Anonymous changes each week. It defies genres and expectations. For example, our most recent episode, I talked to a woman who survived a murder attempt by her own son. But just the week before that, we just talked the whole time about Star Trek. We've had other recent episodes about sexting in languages that are not your first language, or what it's like to get weight loss surgery. It's unpredictable, it's real, it's honest, it's raw. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.